Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again. Hope you're doing really well. Today's show is going to be looking and breaking down at what, in my opinion, is Enzo Maresca's best interview as Chelsea head coach so far. It hasn't been that long, but I do think this one is one of the most interesting ones he's done so far. A lot of great depth, a lot of good answers that we're going to break down, and some answers to questions I think a lot of us have, and I think will spark more discussion, which is really good to see. And I'll give you my thoughts on why I think this one particularly was better than others, and maybe why just more generally the sit-down interviews away from cameras are kind of a little bit better. But we'll delve into that. I'll give you my thoughts, and then you can give me yours in the comments below as ever. If you are new around here, I know a lot of people who watch my show, especially on YouTube, are not subscribed. I think it's like 40-50%, sometimes not subscribing. If you do enjoy the content here and want to see more of it as we get bigger and better heading into the new season, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content. Hit that like button too, comment, get engaged. And thank you again for those who are listening via the podcast feed. And that is, to those watching on YouTube, that's how you can follow the show as well. I basically post all the content on the podcast feed too. So if you just want to listen to it, don't want to see this face, I'm absolutely fine. You can listen to the show as well and get it on the go, as I know a lot of people like to do. So let's get into this interview. Now, this wasn't exactly exclusive for one particular outlet. This was something that I know a variety of Chelsea reporters were talking about. It seemed like he did some form of, I guess you kind of call it a press junket, as they do in films and TV, but more so it seemed like at a hotel, at a more relaxed environment. Enzo Maresca spoke to members of the Chelsea press pack, and this happens pretty regularly, just from first-hand experience when I was out in Australia last summer. It was similar with Serena Wiegmann and the England players. They do it without cameras on, and then those quotes would be taken and put in the media as well. And I think it is a really good environment, because it can evoke, as I think has been proven here with Enzo Maresca, a lot of good and detailed answers, because there is kind of just that natural, I guess, psychological thing. When the camera's turned on, it's maybe being live streamed, not only online, but probably to places like Sky Sports, and things feel a lot more tense probably for coaches. But then when they're kind of sat back, we saw a picture of Maresca on a sofa. He seemed a lot more relaxed about things. And I always felt that, kind of like with Tuchel, who I loved even in front of camera, he was brilliant. But some of the embargoed quotes from Tuchel when the cameras were turned off were even better. And I think it is kind of that relaxed environment. Unfortunately, we don't get with a lot of these coaches. You don't kind of get that a lot, because the most we see them is in that kind of weekly grind of press conferences. But let's go through some of the quotes. So I'm taking these from the Simon Johnson piece, but I'm sure you can see, I know one of my former colleagues at Football.London, Bobby Vincent, is out in America. He put down some of these quotes as well. So I think the funniest thing at the start was, he was talking about his contract. He was talking about singing, and he said if it was in his contract that he had to sing for us to win the title, he would sing every night. So just a little bit of character, a little bit of flavour to it, rather than just kind of bog standard answers. But then he was asked about Man City and reaching the levels of the best teams in the Premier League. This is what he had to say. I would like to reach the same level as Man City as soon as possible. Every manager is asking for time, especially when you change the idea completely. Sometimes it looks like an excuse, but for instance, everyone that watches us is focused on what we do with the ball. We build from behind, but I watched many games last season of Chelsea, and I almost never saw man-to-man high pressing. They always wait a little bit. Since we started, we have decided to go man-to-man because it is our way. So aggressive. It's a big change. The big difference between us and the teams that dominate, Man City and Arsenal, is that one club has had the same manager for 8 years, Guardiola, and the other one for 5 years, Arteta. We've had 2 or 3 weeks. If we played against Celtic with Leicester, we would have played better because I already had 1 year and they knew many things. But when you start, it is the price you pay at the beginning. I'm 100% sure we are on the right path. That's kind of like the headline quote, I think, for a lot of people. I really like this answer. I think that the most interesting part of it is when he talks about pressing, and he talks about the difference between what he watched at Chelsea last year, our pressing on the Pochettino, which at times was quite erratic and could be kind of broken down very easily, compared to going to a man-for-man system, and to see how that operates with Maresca this year. I think off the ball is obviously key. It really is. Chelsea obviously under Maresca are going to be a team that, as he says himself, are going to be judged heavily on what they do with the ball. And that's going to define their creativity, their chances of winning games, how they control it, their decision making. But then on top of that, as we know with Arsenal, as we know with Man City, as we know with the best teams in Europe, that compactness, that aggressiveness off the ball is another key part, and you have to be good pressing. I mean, this is not a new thing, but if it's uncoordinated, if you're a team, I think it's why teams like Chelsea and Man United in recent years, as kind of those bigger clubs, have been left behind of the likes of Arsenal, Liverpool and Man City, because that if your press isn't coordinated at the top level, if you can't do it to a high enough level, you will be punished. I would say though that I think, especially as the season went on, our press did get a lot better, especially in that last run of the season. But of course, moving to man-to-man does have some pitfalls, as any system does. I mean, especially when it is man for man, as we've seen with the likes of Leeds, I think is kind of the one that instantly, pops up in my mind with Bielsa. Space can be opened up very quickly if those players don't win their individual battles. So I think constructing a squad who are not only, of course, good enough on the ball, but off the ball are going to be really good in those one-to-one battles, I think is going to be a key balancing act for Maresca that clearly was a problem against Celtic in the pre-season friendly. He then was asked about Guardiola. He then was asked about style, and he was asked about, what is your style? How similar is it to other coaches? So this is what he had to say. What I don't like is people or you or fans or the club expecting the same football that Man City are doing. Because when I joined Leicester and I met the chairman and the sporting director, they asked me, we want to change the style and we want to play the same way that City play. And I told them, we don't have the same players and I am not the same manager. The same thing when I met Chelsea. I said, the idea is that idea, but probably we need time, because the players also need to understand what way we want to play, and it's a bit different. This is something that I struggle with a little bit sometimes when I see something saying because he's bald and a beard he wants to play the same. No, I don't want. I try to play the way that we want to play. It's probably close because I fell in love with that idea, but that does not mean it is exactly the same way. I think this is a fantastic answer. I think that going straight for the criticisms that I have had but other people have had, I think is a great response from him. And I like the way he focuses in on specifically talking about he doesn't have the same players. I am not the same guy, because a lot of people outside of football talk about tactics now in this almost like religious way, where we kind of look at these coaches, these top coaches like Guardiola, like Klopp, like others, and they're kind of treated like gods, like they're holding a PlayStation controller, and it's very easy for them to just instill ideas. Or you believe that the idea of having a lot of the ball is just flawless, and it's the way that is the only way you can win football matches, and if you just have the right ideas, you can be great. And I think it's funny to me that he's talking about meeting with Chelsea and meeting with Leicester and these people at clubs wanting it because Man City do it, which I don't think is a great reason. I don't think that says a lot about maybe the hierarchy at football clubs, that they are kind of chasing this aesthetic style. But of course, when you're the coach who is asked to implement it, he knows he doesn't have the players at Guardiola's disposal, nor is he Pep Guardiola. Not only doesn't have that experience, and this is not having a go at Maresca, to try and be Pep Guardiola, to try and rival his legacy and what he's done in the game. I mean, it's a near impossible task. So I think that's very important, and I think it's important as well as fans when we're kind of analysing the game, that it isn't just a case of you take certain ideas and they will work wonderfully with every set of players, because players are different, and especially at different levels. This is a concern I have about this style of play, is that if you don't have the best players in the world, it can be as flawed as other systems. So that's something to watch, but I think we'll see how that develops, of course, tangibly on the pitch with Maresca. But I like the fact that he took that criticism head on and didn't try and shy away from it. It's a shame in some ways that this is written down and not said on camera. One of the things I do think about written interviews sometimes is that I think they're better. I think they're a lot better. I think they're a lot more meaningful. I think they say a lot more, and I think you get a lot more insight into what a coach actually thinks, because they're usually more honest. But at the same time, I think a lot of people won't read this, because they'll read headlines, they'll read short little quotes. They won't get this. So I think it's a bit of a shame that it's probably more likely that more people will see the Lee Parker interview, the first press conference, the press conferences he will do. And I'm not saying those are irrelevant. Of course, those are interesting. But I do think there's some really good answers here. So I appreciate it from Maresca. And then he was asked about Cole Palmer, Chelsea's best player, the player of the season, the one that I've written a piece on Substack about, of my concerns of him maybe being limited a little bit by this system, or the fear that you really don't want to stifle what Cole Palmer is and has been and can still be for Chelsea. The idea that he can even go to a higher level. I mean, his reputation is even been enhanced by Euros where he barely played. He didn't start any games, but he scored in the final. He was the only player in that final for England that gave us hope as a nation that something miraculous could happen, and that is the talent of Cole Palmer. And obviously, coming off the back of last season, how can Maresca's very positional, at times quite rigid or very formulaic system work with a player like that who did get a lot of freedom under Mauricio Pochettino? This is what he said. On and off the ball, for sure, he is a fantastic player. He scored over 20 goals last season. Hopefully he can score the same, but it's not easy for any player to score 20 one year and do the same the next. What we want from Cole is to try and be himself. The shame of it is, like with the majority of Chelsea players currently, we get a very clear or quick look at how they operate in the system. So I posted my video with Mono and it was on the podcast as well, where we spoke about Reece James positioning. So something that in theory we've talked about, you get to see it in pre-season. The unfortunate thing is Cole Palmer will not be out in the US, so we have to wait maybe to the Inter Milan game if we even get minutes from there. I mean, be quite amazing if Palmer plays no football in pre-season and the first time he plays for Enzo Maresca is ironically against Man City, because I think if he's ready for that game, he will start that game. But then, of course, the question is, where does he fit in? There's been discussions about this. Is Palmer going to play a more central role? Is he going to play out wide? But, the wide players in Maresca's system are very important, but they are wide players. They are touchline hugging wingers. That was the case at Leicester last year, and already we've seen at Chelsea this pre-season. He demands width, and you do need width when you're playing the style of football he is. You don't want things coming narrow. You don't want teams, being able to get in that very compact block of 2-4s, and they can just kind of sit there and know they don't have to worry about things outside of them. I think you need that width. But with Cole Palmer, obviously he's a lot more than a winger, and you want him drifting in, you want him gliding in, and does he start off the right and glide in? What happens with Christopher Nkunku? Will we see Nkunku and Palmer both start? I think the question I'd ask to you guys is, where would you see them? Because I guess in an ultra attacking mode you could put them as 2-8s. Who plays behind them? Is it Lavia? Is it Caicedo? What's the balance in central midfield looking like there? But then also, if you're not, who's going out wide? I think one of them may play as an 8, Palmer or Nkunku behind a centre forward. But then who goes out wide? Is it going to be Nkunku or is it going to be Cole Palmer? I do think if we move Reece back into a more traditional right-back role, I think there is absolutely room for Palmer or Nkunku, or more so Palmer off the right, to play in that wider role and maybe be able to drift, because then you can still get that width from Reece James rather than him playing in central midfield. I think the fear I have is that what you don't want, and I'm sure Maresca is thinking about this, right, is you have an inverted fullback and then you have a wide player that wants naturally to move centrally, and then suddenly you don't have width on one side, so maybe it becomes a little bit easier to defend for an opposing team. So that's something, of course, cannot be truly evaluated till we start playing games. The only other thing I would say, and of course we spoke about Gallagher on Thursday, is, when you talk about pressing, he is one of the best pressing players we have, and I think Palmer is too. And that's going to be, again, I think one of the big things. I don't think Enzo Fernandez is a great presser. How do you get around that if he's contributing massively to the team in a really obvious, creative way? Of course, that's better than not. Doesn't, just because a player can't press properly doesn't, if they're wonderful, why would you not want them in the team? But obviously, I think Jackson can be quite a good presser as well. So that in itself is another big question mark of that balancing act, I think, in several areas. But Palmer, like Nkunku, I think are key cogs in the Chelsea team. I think they're ones that you want both of those players playing. You want them both starting. I think it's just more of a case that I think we've already seen with Nkunku, where you play him as a centre forward, you play him as a 10, you maybe even play him off the left. I think he's so good, and I think Palmer's of a similar ilk, that they will find those spaces. It's just hopefully them having the freedom to do so. So those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours. I would suggest, link in the description box below. I didn't cover everything in these interviews. I think it definitely is worth your time to go and read these quotes, because I think they give a different side to Maresca that unfortunately we haven't really seen on camera yet. But maybe give us hints and thoughts about what's going to happen when the real stuff gets going against Man City in a couple of weeks. Those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.